And let me tell you something, pastoring your mother is no picnic. It's been one of the biggest challenges of my ministry, especially my mother. You know my mother. You know what I'm talking about. Let me tell you something. I have not spoken to my mother in 2 years. No, not because we're not getting along. I just don't like to interrupt her while she's talking.
Welcome to Church of the Rock from Winnipeg. Stay tuned to this week's thought-provoking message from Pastor Mark Hughes.
This is the one day a year that we set aside to honor our mothers. Can't possibly make up for the other 364, but it's a start, right? And this year we're doing, you probably noticed, a little bit of a rose theme. So we performed for you a rendition of Bette Midler's The Rose, and on your way out, ladies, you're going to be receiving a chocolate rose to eat. You didn't get it on the way in because we don't want little Miss Sticky Fingers all over the place, which might be you, might be your kids, who knows. And so carrying on with that rose theme, I want to give you a little quote from Shakespeare. Many of you remember Romeo and Juliet in that climactic moment, and it begins like this: Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? And then she carries on and she says this: what's in a name? And the reason she said that was he was a Montague, she was a Capulet. These were rival families. This was forbidden love. And so she said, what's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. And so those of you that know Shakespeare know that, and sometimes we misquote it, and it goes like this: a rose by any other name is still a rose. And so my message this morning is entitled, A Mother by Any Other Name. And whatever you call your mother, whatever your kids call you, you're always a mother. Sometimes they actually call you mother, right? If you have a formal home, mother dear. But most of you are mom or mommy or mama or ma or any list of variations of it, but it doesn't matter. A mom is a mom is a mom is a mom, and guess what? You're always a mom. It never really changes. How many of you pick up your kids' clothes? You pick up your kids' clothes? Pretty much. Why are there like grandmas putting up their hands? I guess it never really changes. So is there a story of little Johnny, and little Johnny is the worst at this, and his mother reads him the riot act one day and says, listen, son, you're a teenager now, you can pick up your own clothes, and if you don't pick up your clothes, I'm going to fine you 25 cents for every article of clothing I have to pick up. So at the end of the week, she goes in, there he is lying on his bed, on his iPad, and she said, I picked up 15 articles of clothing this week, you owe me $3.75. He rolled over, gave her a $5 bill, said, here's a $5, keep the change, and hey, keep up the good work, Mom. That's about the way it plays out, right? But I look at my own life, and I've been influenced by two godly mothers. My own mother and the mother of my children, Kathy, my wife. And so last year what I did was I featured my mother. Some of you will remember this. About halfway through the message, I invited her up on stage, and I gave her 5 minutes to do a rebuttal. Big mistake. Never hand your mother the microphone, especially if your mother is my mother. And so she got up here, and she took her 5 minutes to roast me. You all thought it was hilarious. You all laughed, you all clapped. Nobody thought it was better than her, though, and she went and got the DVD, and for the last year, she has been playing it for people. Only her 5 minutes. She doesn't show them the rest of the message. And let me tell you something, pastoring your mother is no picnic. It's been one of the biggest challenges of my ministry, especially my mother. You know my mother. You know what I'm talking about. Let me tell you something. I have not spoken to my mother in 2 years. No, not because we're not getting along. I just don't like to interrupt her while she's talking. You groan, but that's a true story. You know my mom. She loves hearing that, so don't worry about her. So last year I featured my own mother. This year I'm going to feature the mother of my children, my wife, Kathy. And the one thing about Kathy is I think she's the greatest mother in the world. And here's the thing about her. She's got a lot of talents. Kathy is one of these talented and gifted people. But if I had to characterize her as one singular quality, it would be motherhood. And it was interesting to me because I never saw that in her when I married her. I married her because she was cute. Not because I thought she was going to be a great mother. And she never actually showed a lot of interest in children until we had our own. And then when we had our first child, it was like a switch clicked and turned on, and all of a sudden she was super mom. And I'll tell you something. I mean, seriously, I mean, of all the things that she does, the best thing she does is to be a mother. She puts up with me, but she loves our kids. I mean, it's a good thing I'm not needy and need a lot of attention, because she's been singularly focused on our children for some 30 years. And so this is what I'm going to do. I thought, wow, if I'm going to feature my wife, maybe the first thing I'll do, and this was about a month ago, I said, Kathy, I got a great idea. What do you say you preach the Mother's Day message this year? She thought about it for about a nanosecond and said no. And so then I said, how about you come up on stage and I'll interview you? She said no. I mean, that quickly. And I said, well, why don't you just come and do what my mother did last year, and at the end of the message, I'll give you, a 3-minute rebuttal. She said no. So I scratched my head, and then finally I said, how about this? How about you give me your 4 principles of motherhood? Because these things are things people need to know. Why don't you give me your 4 best principles, give them to me in 4 sentences, that's all I want, and I'll weave it into one of my messages, and I'll make it happen. She said, that I can do. And see, she's just not one of those in front of the camera people. She's one of those behind the scenes people, and she would just prefer to stay there. So this entire message this morning is going to be based on the things that come specifically from my wife. So here's the thing, ladies. If you don't like them, don't blame me, blame her, right? You know where to go. So here's what they are. Here's how I've packaged them. We're on this rose theme, and so I've packaged them in this acrostic, R-O-S-E. And here's the Mother's Day rose. These are my wife's principles. They're going to make sense as I go through them. The R stands for refuge. The O stands for overstate. The S stands for shield. And the E stands for encourage. So we're going to start by looking at a little verse here. And it's in Psalm 91, verse 4. You all know Psalm 91, one of the most important Psalms. And there's a little verse here, verse 4, that I want you to look at. And I'm going to use it as a jump-off spot for these 4 points. And this is what it says, Psalm 91, verse 4, he shall cover you with his feathers, talking about the Lord. Under his wings you shall take refuge. There's that word. His truth shall be your shield and your buckler. So the first thing that the scripture says here, and it says it many times in the Psalms and throughout the Old Testament, is that God will be your refuge. He will be your sanctuary. He will be your place of refuge. If you have read the books of Moses, which I trust you have, what God spoke to Moses before they went into the promised land, he says, when you go into this land and you conquer this land, one of the things I want you to do is to establish cities of refuge. And here was the whole idea. He knew that the world was a cruel place. And he knew that if people had done things wrong and if they'd committed crimes and whether they were guilty or not, a lot of times the world convicts you, right? Whether you committed something or not. And so he said, look, if you've got someone, and the example was someone who committed manslaughter, and let's say somebody accidentally kills another person, the world is a cruel place, and they will judge him and ostracize that person. And so therefore, you will have cities of refuge, places where these people can be safe, where they can flee and they can live in these places, and they will be safe and secure, and they will not be judged in those places. And that was a place where even guilty people can go and have a sense of refuge. Now here's what I want to tell you about your home. Your home is a place of refuge, or at least it should be. It is the one place where, regardless of the chaos in the world, you should be able to go and have peace and security and sanctity, where you will not be judged, and even if you've done something wrong, you are still accepted because it is your place of refuge. How many of you have a home that's a place of refuge? I hope you do. How many of you have a chair that's a place of refuge? I mean, not only is it your home, there's a specific place, and you have a chair, and God help anybody if they sit in your chair, right? And you all know what I'm talking about. It doesn't matter what kind of day you've had. You've had the worst day you've ever had, and you're driving home in the car, and the only thought on your mind is this: I can't wait till I get home, because then I will have refuge. And you get home and you plunk your butt into that chair, and this is the word that comes out of your mouth: That's not actually a word, is it? But you all know what I'm talking about, because your home has become a place of refuge. And see, for every one of us, our home needs to be that place of refuge. And no one can create that like a mother can. The mother has the ability to create that environment like no one else. And remember, I think we live in a cruel world, don't you? To some degree, I think we really do. I mean, how many remember, if you're old enough like me, you'll remember this poster that used to be everywhere when I was a kid. And it was this poster, "Goodbye, Cruel World." And there's this little kitty in the toilet. And I'm thinking to myself, seriously, what would a little kitten have to worry about? I've seen kittens. Their life doesn't look stressful to me. They don't look like they have a worry in this world. But you know what? I look at young children today, and I think they're being raised in a hostile environment. That's what I think. I look at the world that we've brought this next generation. I worry about the emerging generation. I worry about what happens just at school. I worry about the amount of sexual immorality that they are bombarded with, that they are being introduced to alternative lifestyles at the early ages. They get bullied at school, and they get emotionally beaten down, and their little spirits get broken. And you know what? The home is the place, right? Or should be that place of refuge where they would come. And the one thing Kathy always did, she made our home a place of refuge. This was not a place of yelling and violence and anxiety and chaos. Some homes are like that. Some homes are stressful. You know what? We don't have yelling in our home. Not that I don't want to yell. I want to yell. But Kathy won't let me. And she says, if you want to yell, you go to work and yell at the staff. So that works fine for me. You know, at least I have an outlet. I can come here and, kick the cat and yell at the staff. It works perfect. Meanwhile, our home is a place of refuge. Our staff, their home is a place of refuge, because Lord knows it's stressful around here for them. And here was my worry, honest to God. Kathy made our home so safe and so comfortable, I was worried our kids would never move out. Right? I mean, that's always the big worry at one stage. You think, are they ever going to move out? So we made a kind of a deal with our kids, and this was the deal. They were allowed to stay till they were 25. Nice round number. Until 25, they were allowed to stay under one condition. And the condition was this, that they would save money. We didn't charge them any rent, but they would save money so that when they were 25, they would have enough money for a down payment to buy a home. I mean, how else are you going to buy a home in today's world? But, here was an opportunity to give them a leg up, because they had an opportunity to save some money, but they're not staying there forever. And so when my son turned 25, we started to have the conversation with him. Well, you've got some money. It's time to think about buying a house and moving out. He says, I'm not sure I want to move out. Well, I don't blame him. It was like living in an all-inclusive resort. I mean, the meals were made, the laundry was done, the bed was made. Why would anyone want to move out? I don't want to move out. Why would I expect him to want to move out? But nevertheless, he was 25, time to give him the old size 12s, right? So anyway, we went out house shopping for him, and he buys this house. We may have twisted his arm a little bit, and he buys this house. So this is the funniest part of this story, and it's absolutely true. This is what happened, is his possession date was on a Friday. He was at work, and I was working at home, and Kathy says to me, I got an idea. Well, Jordan's at work today. Let's move him out. I said, really? Without him? We can move him out tomorrow. She says, no, let's surprise him, and let's move him out. So she made me do all the work. And so we got this truck, and we moved all his furniture from his room. Plus, we gave him all our furniture from the family room. We gave him our dining room suite. I said, what are we going to use? She says, I hate that old junk anyway. I was wanting to get rid of it. And so we moved his whole house. We set him up at his house. Then Kathy went to the grocery store and filled his fridge. I will never forget the look on his face when he came home. He walked into his bedroom and he went, where's my stuff? To which Kathy said, oh, you moved out. He was so surprised. But anyway, that's how we did it. You can do it how you want. And here's the point. I think a mother has the ability to make a house, a home, a place of refuge. So the first thing the R stands for refuge. Your house should be a place of refuge. The second thing, the O stands for overstate. Now, this is going to make some sense in a minute. When we look at this verse, Psalm 91, it says that he shall be our refuge, and his truth shall be our shield and our buckler. And one of the most important things for young people, children and young adults, is to have the values, the virtues, and the truth of Christianity instilled, imparted, and inculcated into them. And I know you're sitting there saying, that does not start with O. I know, I had a lot of trouble with this one. All the words I wanted to use started with I, but then it's rise, not rose, and I'm going with rose. And so I'm going to jam this one in sideways, if you don't mind. But I want to talk about this thing, because the truth of our faith does not come automatically. Just because you are a member of the human race doesn't mean you have values, doesn't mean you have virtue, does not mean you know the truth of God's word. You have to have that instilled. You have to have it imparted. Someone has to teach you. Someone has to educate you. You can probably all finish this for me. Finish this for me. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Oh, we love that. Lawyers quote it, politicians quote it, educators quote it. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Really? How are you going to know the truth? How come we always quote that out of context? You know what the rest of the verse says? It says this. It says, if you abide in my word, and my word abides in you, then you are my disciples indeed, and then you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. You don't know the truth until you abide in his word. And so when we look at this idea of our kids and raising them up in the virtues of the faith, like Timothy, it says, I know your mother, Eunice, I know your grandmother, Lois, and I know the genuine faith that was in them is also in you. Why? Because they imparted it. And they took it and taught and trained. And the reason I use the word overstate is for this reason. The one thing Kathy loved to do with our children was to teach them values and virtues. Things like patience and kindness and gentleness, the fruit of the Spirit. Things like forgiveness and patience and acceptance, and things like sacrifice and giving to others and not living for yourself. But you know what? You can't say those things once and expect them to happen. You know what you have to do? You have to overstate them. You have to continually bring it before them. They're not just going to get it in a few moments. You can't just give them one lesson on this. And a lot of times people say, well, I send my kids to children's church. I'm sure they're going to get it there. They go to the youth group. Good night. In 45 minutes a week, you think they're going to get what they need? No. All those things do is reinforce what you have at home. And you see, like I said, our kids are being bombarded all around them. There are influences all around them that are incredibly negative things. And it's up to us as parents and you as mothers this morning, because that's what I'm talking about, to overstate the obvious that might be obvious to you, but it's not to them. And what you do is you take the message and the truth of the gospel, and you instill it into them. And so the first thing, the R stands for the refuge, the place of refuge. The O stands for overstate. You need to overstate the things of the faith in order to get them where we need to get them. The S in the rows stands for shield. He says, his truth shall be your shield and your buckler. Anybody know what a buckler is? Probably only a couple of people in the room know what a buckler is because they know they're medieval war weapons. But here's a picture. This is a shield and a buckler. The one on the right, that's a shield. We all understand that. It's a big shield in which you use in battle to block whatever. The guy on the left, he's got a buckler. And a buckler is actually a very small shield, and it's used in combat almost oftentimes in an offensive way, not just defensive. And you will use it to shield arrows and knock down spears and the sword and different things. And it's a very, very effective defensive and offensive weapon. So that's the difference between a shield and a buckler. And normally when we think of God being our shield, probably the image that comes to mind is the Roman shield. And here's the Roman shield wall, and this is how the Romans did battle. They were very effective at this, is that they would create, with these huge Roman shields, they would create this Roman shield wall, and they would go into battle, and you can see, I mean, they're almost impenetrable because they used their shields so well. Now, on the other hand, Captain America, he has a buckler, right? Captain America, I mean, he has a small shield. What would Captain America be without his shield? He has no superpowers. You know that, don't you? He needs that shield. And that shield's pretty amazing stuff. And so there's the shield and there's the buckler. And mothers, you are to be the shield bearer. And you know where that term comes from? It's sort of fascinating because it actually comes from Goliath in battle. And when Goliath came out into battle, you remember he was 9 feet 9 inches tall, and he came out with this huge spear and this huge javelin. And do you know that he wasn't even carrying his own shield? And he said he had a shield bearer go in front of him. And in the days of David and Goliath, the commanders actually had someone else that held the shield for them. And even David, later on, if you go read the story, he had an armor bearer, remember, named Jonathan. He would carry the armor. And here's what I want you to think about, mothers in particular today. If Goliath needed a shield bearer, if David needed a shield bearer, if the Starship Enterprise needs deflector shields, how much more do our children need a shield in this hostile world in which we live in? And so that's your role. You see, what did Ephesians chapter 6 say? It says, talks about the armor of God. It says, put on the whole armor of God. And then it says, above all, taking up the shield of faith with which you are able to extinguish the fiery darts of the evil one. You see, we live in an evil world. We live in a hostile place. And if we think we can just send our kids out into the world and they will not be damaged, we need to think again. And it is our job and yours as mothers and fathers to be the shield for them and to protect them and keep them out of harm's way. And one of the things Kathy always understood about this was she understood it was her job to shield them. And you know, I would say, if I had to say this, she was more of a Roman shield than a buckler. And some people would look at the way she raised our kids and think, well, she was probably a little overprotective by today's standards. And that might be true. But why wouldn't you want to be in the world that we live in today? Do you know that 1 out of 4 girls get sexually abused before the age of 18? Do you know that 1 out of 6 boys get sexually abused before the age of 18? What kind of world are we living in if we don't have parents that are willing to shield them for those sort of things? So I don't know what you're doing, but Kathy didn't let our kids go to sleepovers. When they were young kids, they weren't going. She says, I'm not sending them over to that house. I don't know what goes on in that house. And she says, they're not going. And our kids argued and they complained and they whined about it, but we didn't care because we put the safety of our kids above everything else. And so it wasn't until they were well into their teen years that they started, and we knew that they'd be safe and they knew that they could set their own parameters, that we allowed them to go to those sleepovers. When they went on a band trip or on a sports trip or on a school trip, guess who always volunteered to go along on the trip as a chaperone? No, not me, Kathy. I didn't go. She's been all over the province. She's been to Souris and Verdun and Oak Lake. We drive by these wonderful vacation places, and she points out the hotels that she stayed in. She said, I stayed in that hotel. I went, oh, I missed that one. And why was she there? She said, as long as I'm there, I know what my kids are doing. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh, that sounds really overprotective. Maybe so. But when you look at what's happening in our world today, I don't know if you can be too overprotective. God himself says, I will be your shield and buckler. And it's really one of the roles of the mother and, of course, the father. You do know that as our kids get older and as we have more children, we actually drop our shields. We let our shields come down. You know it's true. Think about when you had your very, very first child and you got your first babysitter for the very first time. That babysitter was at your home, you phoned her every 20 minutes to make sure the kid was okay. By the time you have your second child, now you're hiring babysitters and you say, here's the phone number, and you go out for dinner and you hope she doesn't call, right? And by the time you have your third child, you give your sitter specific instructions. Don't you dare call unless you see blood, right? Our shield comes down as things go on. So the R stands for refuge, the O stands for overstate the truth, the S stands for shield, and the last and the final thing is this, encouragement. Our kids, of all people, need encouragement. It was William Ross Wallace who said this. He said that the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. And what he was talking about was the influence of a mother. Napoleon said the future end of the child is in the work of the mother. And when we look at history, we realize that many of the great people, men and women of history, actually give regard to the mother and how they encourage them to be whatever they came to be. right? You've all heard the expression, behind every successful man, there is a surprised mother-in-law, right? Isn't that the truth? I love what Pablo Picasso said. He said, my mother always encouraged me that whatever I did in life, I would be the best at. And she told me if I was a soldier, I'd become a general. She said if I was a monk, I would become the Pope. And he said, instead, I was a painter, and I became Picasso. Humble. Here's what I want to tell you, moms. Our kids need encouragement all the way along, from birth to grave. They need the encouragement, and there's something in the work of a mother that can encourage them and cause them to become everything that they are meant to be. Let me close with one final story here today. Happened when our middle daughter was in high school, and our kids are all jocks. We're all jocks. That's what we do sports. And so when she was in school, she did every sport. And so she did soccer, and she did volleyball, and she did basketball. And when badminton season came along, she did badminton. Never played badminton before in her life. It's badminton season. I'm playing badminton. Buy me a racket. So we buy her a racket, and she starts playing badminton. She goes into the school championships, and she wins the school championship because the rest of them were even bigger hackers than she was. And so she wins this tournament, and she gets to go and represent the school in the city finals for badminton for her grade. And so off she goes, and we're thinking this will be interesting, because she was up against what I'll call real badminton players, people that were in club leagues and tournament players and different things. So she goes into this tournament, started at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and she's winning some, losing some, winning some. By the end of the day, by 8 o'clock, 5 hours later, she finds herself in the finals for the championship of this whole thing. We're completely astounded that she's there, and she comes. Now remember, she's been playing badminton for 5 hours. She's completely exhausted. She comes over to Kathy and she says, I'm done. I'm exhausted. I just want to go home. I just want to forfeit the match and go home, right? Her place of refuge. You got this, right? Kathy looked her right in the eye and said, you are not going home. You are not going home. You are exhausted, but you know what? So is the other girl. She's just as exhausted as you. She's been here for 5 hours too. Here's the secret. What you need to do is you need to go onto that court and pretend you're as fresh as a daisy. Whatever you do, don't let her see that you're exhausted, or then you're done. And so you need to go out there and you need to be tough, because it's not going to be the best player who's going to win this. And guess what? The other girl was a much better player. And she says it's not going to be the girl who's the best player. It's the one with the most mental toughness, and that's you. So get out there and pretend you're not tired. So my daughter took a racket and skipped out onto the court. Her opponent took one look at that and said, I'm finished. Her opponent became completely unglued in the match and folded like a cheap lawn chair, and my daughter wins the whole shooting match. So that's how that story ends. She came home so surprised. But see, don't misunderstand this. This is not about winning and losing. You know what? Your kids are not going to win every time in life. Guess what? They're also not going to lose every time in life. But what they will do is have the right attitude, and it's a mother's responsibility to instill in them that attitude and encourage them. Whatever adversity they're facing in life, they can overcome that, and to encourage them, because what happens is when the going gets tough, the tough get going. That's how that works. And so we encourage our kids that whatever they're facing in life, see, it's mental toughness that is what they need. And we encourage our children to be everything that they are meant to be. Every mother is a rose, someone who establishes their home as a place of refuge, overstates the truth and the virtues of the faith, puts up that shield to extinguish the fiery darts of the evil one, and encourages them to become everything that they are meant to be in God. That is the role of a mother. Let's stand together, shall we?
Church of the Rock has services every Sunday at 1397 Buffalo Place, and we invite you to join us when you're in the Winnipeg area. If you'd like a booklet to help you understand more about God's gift of forgiveness and reconciliation through Jesus Christ, please contact us, and we'd be happy to send you a free copy of the Book of Hope. Visit our website at www.churchoftherock.ca. Thank you for watching, and God bless you.